Hi, my name is Kartic Godavarthy and I am the Faculty of Anthropology here at Vajiram and Ravi. In today's class, we shall be looking at the concept of culture. Culture, as you are aware, is an anthropological variable. Anthropology is a discipline that is devoted to a discourse on human nature. And the human nature in all its glory essentially works itself out within the context of culture. The human biology, the human society, the human behavior as such is essentially influenced by and in turn influences culture. And in fact, culture is considered to be the raison d'etre of anthropological reasoning. In fact, most of the parallels of other social sciences that exist in anthropology are uniquely different from them in the context of how we are going to make use of the concept of culture in explaining the various facets of human behavior and the human nature. Let's first try to understand the meaning of culture, and subsequently, we will be looking at it in all its dimensions throughout the syllabus. The word culture is essentially from biology. It's derived from a Latin word, colere. And this Latin word colere roughly translates into a tending or to cherish in English. The word culture is used in the context of agriculture. When you're growing tissues in a lab, we call it tissue culture, sericulture or horticulture, pisciculture. I mean, the meaning of the term culture is not in any way different in the context in which we are using it. Because culture is considered to be that particular phenomenon that is responsible for nurturing and also tending and protecting the human species. And probably that's the reason why this complex human behavior was thought to be better represented by this term that we have borrowed from biological sciences and the life sciences. The popular meaning of the culture or the popular usage of the term culture is very different from the way we understand it in anthropology. People normally use the word culture to denote some kind of an intellectual ability, polished behavior, or they use the word to denote a person who is supposed to be having some kind of an etiquette. In fact, this popular meaning is also found in the expressions like an uncultured person or an uncultured animal. Well, when it comes to anthropology, there is nothing like uncultured because culture is considered to be an attribute of the genus Homo to which the whole of humanity belongs. The genus Homo is characterized by having certain biological aspects which enable the human beings to subsequently develop this behavioral complex called as culture. A sophisticated brain, especially the most complicated cerebral cortex, the ability to stand on the two legs, the erect posture and bipedal locomotion, resulting in freeing up of our forelimbs or the hands, and these forelimbs evolving into nimble organs with which we can actually start manipulating, the objects around us. And many other biological aspects have contributed to the development of culture in our species, the Homo sapiens. In fact, the word sapien roughly translates to wise and wisdom. And the reason we call ourselves the wise man or the species that is characterized by wisdom is essentially because of the presence of this complex behavior that you and I normally refer to by the term culture. So let's look at some basic nature or basic points in the nature and the essence of culture. Just imagine the human life without all those material objects that surround us. We started making tools with the help of stones probably millions of years ago. And today, this material complex has evolved into sophisticated technologies, nanotechnologies. We are talking about medical technologies that are today on the verge of preventing our own extinction as a species. And just imagine your life without all these material comforts that are provided by your ability to invent and your own ingenuity. And imagine the human life without all those social relationships, without all those social institutions like marriage, family, the economic organizations, the political systems, or kinship, and even religion. Life would be inconceivable, unimaginable, not only in the absence of material comforts, but also because of the vacuum that may be created in our lives in the absence of all those social relationships. And just imagine our lives without all those ideals, the rules, the value systems, and all this normative behaviors like the do's and don'ts, the shoulds and the shouldn'ts, and the laws and the customs and whatnot. I mean, culture is, in an essence, an organic whole that constitutes this moral, this material, social, and mental aspects of life. So these moral, material, social, and mental aspects of life together constitute an organic whole. And this organic whole is the one that is giving you and me what is called as a design for living. It is like a blueprint for life. All we have to do is just follow the blueprint, which has already been developed for us by the time we are born. And in the course of our life's journey, we can probably add some new milestones in that blueprint of life and hand it over to subsequent generations. And this design for living is what we call as culture. Let me give you some points in the nature of culture even before I introduce you to some of the academic definitions. The nature of culture. The first point, I just told you that culture is a design for living. Culture is actually an historically created design for living. Culture is not something that's created by us in this generation. Culture is not something that is created recently. But culture is considered to be a body that has been passing on from one generation to the other ever since it was created millions of years ago. And across generations, people of every generation will add their little bit to this repertoire of culture and hand it over to the subsequent generations. So much so that by the time a human child is born, he has the ability to simply follow the rules, the guidelines, the institutions, the value systems, and the material technologies to make sure that all the needs of its life are met. And that's the reason why we say that this design for living of culture is not something that you and I created today, but it is something that has been coming to us by virtue of we learning from the earlier generations and teaching to the subsequent generations. And it is in this process of moving from one generation to the other, the culture may also be susceptible to some kind of change. And that's the reason why the cultures of today are probably different from the cultures of yesteryears and older generations. That's the first point in the nature of culture. Number two, culture is non-genetic. I just told you that it's an attribute of genus Homo. It is our biological capacities that is responsible, or they are responsible for us having something called as culture. Even though culture is dependent on our biology, culture itself is not a biological phenomenon. It is not something that we are inheriting by virtue of our genes. It is not something that we are inheriting by virtue of biological processes of inheritance. Culture has to be learned by every individual, and there has to be people who are willing to teach and share their experience with us so that we can learn and inculcate culture. That's the second point in the nature of culture. And the third point in the nature of culture, culture is unique to man. Well, there are other species, especially our closest relatives in the order primate of the class Mammalia, who may be exhibiting certain behavior patterns that are similar to our culture. There are also material tools that are used by lower organisms. Birds are using raw material in order to build their own nests. Some lower animals are known to be making use of pebbles and rocks to break open the crustacean shells before they consume the meat inside. But those are all those that these animals are capable of doing. Their biological capacities are pretty restricted only to those specific behaviors, and those behaviors are something that they are manifesting or exhibiting purely by virtue of their instincts. But when it comes to the human culture, it is much more sophisticated. Like, for example, our culture has a very important aspect called the symbolic behavior. Take, for example, the domain of religion is completely symbolic. We create a supernatural world, a sacred world, and in this sacred world we believe are supernatural forces and powers, the evils, the gods, the deities, and we try to communicate with them again through symbolic rituals and prayers and whatnot. In fact, right now at this very moment, I am making some sounds. And these sounds that I am emanating from my mouth are making some kind of a sense to you is because these sounds are put together into words, words into sentences, and these sentences are subsequently end up developing as a language, which is also another sophisticated symbolic behavior that the humans are capable of. And that's again something very unique to the human cultural ability. Not only this, we also have something like morality. We try to differentiate between what is right and what is wrong. And this aspect of human behavior, the rational behavior and moral behavior, is something I'm sure that other animals are not capable of. And when the human being is exhibiting such complex cultural behaviors, obviously we can make use of these facts and conclude that culture is unique to man. And then finally, the last point in the nature of culture is culture is characterized by unity as well as diversity. Well, wherever the humanity exists, wherever the humanity is living, it is living in complex organizations called societies and following a special or a specific way of life called culture. And culture is universal. Every human society in this world and every human being in this world who is intellectually capable of learning and inculcating knowledge has culture. Every society in this world has its own structure, has its own organization, and has its own different levels of development or evolution. Every society is made up of institutions like marriage, family, kinship, economic production, distribution, and consumption systems, political systems responsible for social control, laws and customs. Every society also has the institution of religion and magic. And every society in this world has its own structure, some kind of a stratification, and it has its own behaviors, language, speech, and whatnot. And every single society in this world has all these components, but this culture, in spite of being universal, is again at the same time very unique. In a sense that every culture of any specific society in this world has its own unique nature, unique footprint, and it is something that is responsible for such a glorious diversity within which the humanity as such is thriving and surviving across the planet Earth. So culture is universal. In a sense, every society in the world has culture. And there is some kind of a unity that exists in all the individuals who belong to our species because of this cultural, behavioral, and social aspects. But at the same time, we are unique at this, in this context is because we have our own way of experiencing the world through the windows of culture and behavior. So that is the nature of culture.